Hi, everybody. Welcome back to ReaDEFY Learning Vodcast. I am so excited for today because we are about to interview one of my heroes from afar, and I'm very, very excited to introduce Peggy Stern to the ReaDEFY Vodcast today. Peggy is an Academy Award-winning film producer, director with more than 30 years experience. Her dyslexia led her to filmmaking and animation at a very young age. And in March 2006, Stern won the Oscar for Best Animated Short. Stern has produced for PBS, HBO, Teachers College at Columbia University, the National PTA, and National YWCA, among others. She received her BA from Harvard University, and her senior thesis film, Stephanie, was turned into a PBS documentary special and broadcasted nationally. SuperDVille is a family affair, as her dyslexic daughter, Emma, has been a key advisor. And Peggy, what I would love to do first is to just show the trailer for SuperDVille for those people who might not know what it is.
Sounds good.
All right.
I'm having trouble at school.
Aren't we all?
I'm never gonna be good at spelling, so I'm just gonna give up.
I have a solution for your problem.
Singing is a great way to remember things.
It's a great way to remember those complicated names.
A cutscene reads the words. The left brain transfers them to the right brain. The right brain then helps translate into pictures.
Isn't it cool to know that there are Super D kids all over the world just like us?
Hi, I'm Brooklyn.
I'm Kaya.
My name is Charlie.
I am dyslexic and I have ADD.
Thinking differently is thinking smart.
Here's your chance to show us what your Super D brain can do.
What are your goals and dreams? We cut out clouds and wrote our goals on them. It's just really good practice to set goals.
Come up with 3 ingredients that you think would make a delicious, weird, or outrageous dish. Then draw what the final dish will look like.
It might take a few months, even a few years. But if you keep working at it, you're only gonna get better.
Thanks, that means a lot, guys.
Super D!
Yes. Yes. Oh, I'm just so excited. I am so excited to have you today. Yeah, this is just, you are speaking my language, and I would love it if you could start by just kind of telling us a little bit more about yourself, Peggy, and SuperDVille.
Well, sure. And it's so fun for me to even see the trailer again. And I like to just tell everybody right now who does see this that for this year, as we did last year, superdville.com, which is where you can go and find all the videos and the curriculum, and is free because of COVID. We decided to make it accessible to everyone because it is on the web. It is, easy to access. So it's good for hybrid learning, kids who are at home, or it's good for doing some in class and then parents being involved and doing stuff, but it is completely free to get on. That won't be true, in the fall of 2022, because we hope that things will really be more back to normal, but I just want people to know that. When you were reading my bio, I thought, well, it's so funny that I say, Peggy found filmmaking and animation at a young age. And I think, oh, well, anyone who's the parent of a child with a learning difference is probably going, aha, she found something that was not necessarily the more reading, writing, and, arithmetic, because for me, I was very lucky. My dyslexia was identified when I was very young because my grandmother was in the field. And I mean, at 5, it was identified. And I started having tutoring, and my parents luckily, had the resources. I lived in New York City. I was able to find, they were able to find an Orton Gillingham trained tutor back in 1963 or something.
Wow.
And so, I've always had a feeling of wanting to give back, because I was slightly haunted by the feeling of what if I had not had a grandmother who identified this? What if, I hadn't gotten the help when I was really young? And when I asked my tutor, who stuck with me from the time I was 5 until I was really in like 7th grade, she became more, I would say, of a homework helper maybe, but she knew how my brain worked. So it was amazing. I once asked her when I was older, like, what do you think would have happened to me if I hadn't had you? And she kind of looked right at me and said, I think you would have ended up in jail as a juvenile. I was like, what are you doing? She said, you were so angry when you would come. I would go there after school 3 days a week. And it was sort of like I had regular school where they had no idea back then, what was going on or what to do. And there were no resources or services or anything. Right. And then you would come to me, and you were just so frustrated with the things you were being told, that you weren't trying, that you were slow, all the things you can imagine. So fast forward, I did find filmmaking, first photography, then filmmaking, because for me, the visual was the strong thing. I had dyscalculia and dyslexia. So math and reading were really hard for me, but I did learn how to read thanks to Dorothy and her constant creative. I called her my Mary Poppins when I was older. It was amazing how creative she was. And I never really learned math, but I became a really good reader and loved reading. And so I think, filmmaking became a way for me to access all kinds of things using this stronger part of my brain, which was my visual memory, while, my recall and memory of sequences that had words was terrible. So I, started making films in college, and then went on and did have, ultimately this success with an animator partner who I worked with for 15 years. And the film that we won the Academy Award was a personal story about his childhood. And when we were done, he turned to me and said, okay, Peggy, it's your turn. And I knew exactly what he meant, which is he knew that dyslexia was something that, I still struggled with in a way. If I should tell people what, were my hurdles, and I was the mother of a dyslexic. And so that was a whole nother thing, because then I had the experience of having raised a child in the more current school system, right? And I saw some things that had improved and changed, and many things that hadn't changed at all from my day.
Right.
So I decided I needed to do something. And I'll fast forward through all the different ideas that we tried. I mean, I thought I was going to make a documentary because I wanted to change the stigma. There were all kinds of, I wanted to tackle so many things, right? Yeah. But then I had this kind of aha moment talking to a parent of a dyslexic child who said, even though their child was at an LD school, a special school for kids with dyslexia in New York, they came home so frustrated at the end of the day sometimes with the sense of just how hard it was and the repetition, and they were just frustrated. And this parent was dyslexic. So he said, I wish I had something I could just sit down with my little boy and we could kind of watch together and then talk about. And, it would be a way for me to try to help him feel better, with confidence. And it just, I realized that's what I want to do. I want to do something for the kids. I want something that they can have, this generation. And I always knew that it needed to be about the emotional side, because I wasn't going to be teaching reading. I'm a filmmaker, and I could access what I didn't really know was now a whole field called social emotional learning. I mean, to me, it was just, you work at teaching a child how to read. And as a parent or as a teacher who's doing that with a child who has dyslexia, there's absolutely no doubt that if you're trained in multisensory, different, ways of actually teaching reading that are particularly good for a brain that is, needs that scaffolding, the child will have a much easier time learning how to read. And in fact, many kids, even not identified with an LD problem, benefit from that kind of instruction, right?
Right.
But alongside it is the fact that at a pretty young age, you know that you're doing things differently, right? You know that you either literally are taken out of the classroom and have to go somewhere, and then you have feelings about that, or just that your siblings or a cousin or some way that you're, struggling. So it was always clear to me that part of what my tutor did was help my emotional sense of myself, help me with a few areas. I mean, even back then in the 60s, before there was SEL, she helped me identify how my brain worked, what its strengths were. And that was partly through what did I love to do? What did I find pleasure in and get happy about? Also how to advocate for myself, so that if someone, was not seeing that I was struggling or I needed something told to me in a different way. So that self-advocacy was important. How to work on my confidence, and be able to have a sense that even if you struggle, that doesn't mean that you can't get there and be good at something. And we didn't have anything that was called growth mindset, at that time, but certainly she really emphasized you are not comparing yourself to other people. That's not how you do well in life. You're going to, have to really work on doing things and seeing how you improve. And whatever that improvement is should be celebrated, even if others have improved way more than you in one particular area, because there are probably things that they can't do that you do, So I had all of that. And I think that was what allowed me to quote unquote succeed, and go to, schools that were pretty challenging and all of that, because I had a sense of myself beyond my dyslexia baggage. I had plenty of baggage. I mean, all the adults I meet who grew up in my generation, they do. It's crazy. We all have the same dreams, of being in a test, which we never studied for, or, but they're like heightened because of the dyslexia. So that's sort of a long answer of how I got into all of this. And I was lucky enough to, have the skills of being a filmmaker, and knew that because I came from documentary, I wanted to use real kids who had learning differences. But I knew that for schools and for kids' attention spans and for it to be useful in a classroom, we should have scripts, and it should be short, and they should be able to be used in like little sort of nuggets, and so that's how we came up with this hybrid of using real kids, but doing narrative and letting the kids inform it in some ways, because we would workshop stories with them, get their own experiences, put that into the scripts. If they didn't think something was authentic, they were the first to tell us these actors were dyslexic or ADHD or both, or dysgraphia. They all had different kinds of LD, but all of them were dyslexic. So that's how it came about, and it took a while, but it's, it's been the most gratifying thing I've done in my career.
It's so amazing. I hope you don't mind going off on a tangent a little bit, but I do wonder, in your experience, how you have seen, as you were saying, we now are finally starting to realize what types of structured literacy are really needed for the 1 in 5 children who have dyslexia, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed, right? But what have you noticed, or what have you seen when we're talking about the SEL, right? When we're talking about the social emotional piece, have you noticed a change in that area in the last 30 years?
Oh, yeah. I mean, an acknowledgement that, that kids really take a beating, and that not only do they take a beating from the outside world, because they can be teased and bullied at school, or they can have family members and relatives who don't get it and think that they're not trying. Even in their own families, you hear stories.
Right.
But and you hear parents who are tearing their hair out because they can't get, the relatives on board, sort of. But I think that the other thing is that kids beat up on themselves.
Yes.
And that starts very young.
Right.
And I think the most well-meaning, enlightened parent can run up against this. That kids are bright. They notice things. And just the fact that you notice that other kids are getting through something, or a classic is, well, everybody's already, reading books that have actual, pages of writing, and I'm still at picture books. I mean, that can be in kindergarten. And the child doesn't even know whether they have dyslexia, let's say, but they know something is going on, because why can't they do what these other people around them can do?
Right.
And, I think kids with dyslexia become brilliant at hiding it, and they memorize, everything in the book, and they get away with it for a while.
Right.
But that sets something in motion, I think, that is a core problem if it's not addressed in the ways that SEL has now educated us to think about.
Right. How did you feel like your tutor was able to do that for you in ways that you feel that you're trying to accomplish with SuperDVille?
So I think I'll give you one example that I think sort of sums it up. That maybe I'd been working with her for 2 years or 3 years. So I, was 7, let's say.
Yeah.
And I loved to tell stories, and I loved stories. I just couldn't read, but I loved people to read to me, and I loved, watching movies. And so she knew that. She had picked up on that early on. So she used to do this thing where she would have me dictate a story to her. She would say, oh, today, why don't you tell me a story about, something that happened on a trip you took? Or it didn't have to be about me even. Like she'd say, there's, 2 little boys and they get lost in the woods, or whatever. And they'd be, relatively short, and she would type them up as I was talking. And then that's what we would work on. That's what I would be looking. And inherent in that was saying, Peggy, your stories are wonderful. They're worth writing down. They're worth my typing.
Right.
They're worth our spending time on you learning to read. And it just was such an incredible message to give a young child, because it sort of said that my ideas had value. It encouraged me to be creative in, this subtle way. So that was one thing she did that was amazing. And then another thing, she just did, I think but because we would work at her house, I used to go to her house after school. Sometimes we would do cooking, and I'd have to read the recipe, which meant that I had to deal with my math issues, because there would be pairings. So she would make Go Fish games. This was before the computer. This was before there were much around. So she'd come up just with things, and she'd cut little pieces of paper. And so she was very aware that it couldn't just be rote books, like workbooks. She needed to tap into my creativity or my interests. Right. And that was, I think, the key. And this piece of letting me be part of the process, sort of.
Right. Well, in terms of SuperDVille, and in addition to the fact that you are making it free in all of us, which is truly such a gift, how would you describe that it has changed over the years since it began?
Well, it grew a lot in its concept. And I do want to clarify one thing, which we're very excited about. We have partnered with a company that makes a language arts and math curriculum for core curriculum for public schools called Great Minds.
Great Minds.
And I don't, maybe you've heard of it. It's in many schools around the country. Okay. And it's ELA for K through 12, and called Wit and Wisdom is the English language arts. And I think Eureka is the math. And so they have partnered with us to include our SEL curriculum. And it'll be part of the, offerings that they bring out to public schools. And that was always my goal, is to get into public schools. Obviously independent schools or kids with schools for kids with LD. I'm thrilled if they want to use this, and they also distribute to those schools. But I never wanted to be the distributor, because that's a job unto itself to, get into districts and get in every state or whatever. It's hard.
Right.
And I just wanted to make the content and then say, hopefully someone who has the other, the doors open will like it and will partner. So for schools, they need to go to great minds and it won't be free, but, hopefully schools have the money. Right now, there actually, is funding for SEL, et cetera. Right. But it will continue to be free for tutors, for parents, for homeschoolers, because that's the market that we're keeping. Because that, and I think how it grew is that I had people who saw the first pilot video and they were extremely like, oh, this should go on YouTube. Kids will love this. And we did a test on YouTube and we got 1,000, subscribers quite quickly because the videos are fun, and I parted ways with that potential partner because I said, that's not my goal. Because if kids just watch this, they'll laugh, they'll think it's fun, but they'll move on. And I want them to watch it. Then I want them to have a discussion, whether it be with other kids, with a teacher, with their parent, where they think about the theme and how it relates to them. And then I want them to do a hands-on activity with the kinesthetic experience, whether it's sort of writing or art or, but somehow an activity that will, sort of help them take it into themselves. And so over time, I worked with educators to do that. I didn't do that myself. And we were really lucky to get to work with people, Melissa Orkin, Dr. Melissa Orkin at Tufts, who focused on SEL for kids with learning differences. And then 2 wonderful teachers from Cambridge, Mass, and they work in different parts of Boston, who went to the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and they specialize in, special ed. And so they really helped form what became the curriculum part, so we did the videos with their ideas in mind and vice versa. We really worked together. And now on the site, all of that exists as a package. So you watch the video and then you can go to the curriculum, which is written and downloadable or just on the site. And it's translated into many languages, 8 languages. Wow. So for parents, if you are, English is your second language, but you want to do this with your child, you can really, read it in your own language first. And then we put all of the videos into Spanish, because we also wanted all the kids who have Spanish as their first language to have easy access to the videos. So all of those things were things we developed over time, and then tested in public schools, tested in some LD private schools, tested with parents, tutors. So there was a lot that went into this before it went out into the world, because we really wanted to get it right. We really wanted it to be not just fun. It had to be fun or the kids wouldn't watch it, right? So that was number 1. We had to make videos that kids wanted to watch. So we did accomplish that. I think it helped that a lot of the people who worked on this were dyslexic, in their 20s. And the writers, the other directors, it was very authentic. But then we wanted to get the other piece of what would really help kids get something out of this beyond just having fun watching a video.
Right. And I love how you said that. I think that's so critical. There's such a different element that you're bringing to children when you are not just asking them to intake something, right, and digest it and watch it. And I think really taking that next step and actually sitting and talking with someone about what they just witnessed, and helping our kids not internalize their experience, right? I think that's a huge part of the issue for our children with dyslexia, especially as we talk about getting into the middle school grades and the high school grades, is that over and over you hear that the children are internalizing, right? There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of isolation that's happening with their experience. So the fact that you are not only putting together an amazing production, but that you're putting in activities to be done with someone that you love, or another.
Yes. They're designed so they can be done with a class of 20 kids even. And every video has 4 activities.
Wow.
And the idea of that is, number one, they're different. You know, the activities use different parts of the brain, different skills. And kids like watching the videos over and over because they're short, and kids like watching video, you know, things over and over. So it's not hard to get them to do that. And then each time they learn something new, they see something new, they get at a different angle. So it makes the curriculum more robust, but it also, I think the repetition is important. And I think for anyone who's worked with kids with LD, you know that, you know, that it's important to kind of get at it again, you know, like, okay, let's talk about this again this week, you know, but it's made in a way where teachers or tutors or whomever's using it can decide the order, how they want to do it. If you don't want to do all four, you know, it's very much a user-friendly curriculum, because I really believe every child is different, or every situation, and that each adult who's doing this and interacting with the kids knows that and knows who their audience is. This is not designed for kids to go on and do alone like a game. You know, it's a very collaborative experience, and it very much is thinking of the triangle of the child, the educator, and the parent.
Yeah.
To me is key for the success of any kid with LD. You know, that all of those have to come together and have a language that's shared in terms of the emotional life. Obviously, everyone has their own role, you know, but in terms of understanding how the child is feeling, and the child feeling they could talk to their parent or to their teacher or their tutor, I think is critical. If you don't have the support at home, you're only going to get so far, you know, with the other, and vice versa.
It's so true. I think we talk about that triangle a lot in education, right? Especially if you're in a private practice or, and unfortunately what we hear about more and more is kind of this triangle of negativity, right? You know, and that like, oh, I hate school, or, oh, you know, why is this child not trying, or, oh, what's wrong with my kid? And I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to the idea of, what you're looking to do next with just kind of focusing in on the middle school population.
Well, I love how you just described that. And I've actually never quite heard it described that way, as the triangle of negativity. But I think that one thing that is critical and is inherent in how we did SuperDVille is community. So it's peer to peer, you know, I mean, that's what it is. The videos are peers, kids are seeing themselves. Right. So the onus is not on only the adults, you know, the kids are sharing their experiences with each other. And by doing that, they're beginning to blast open the stigma. Even, I mean, Great Minds is going to distribute this to general ed. They believe that the videos are critical for all kids to see, because kids in a general ed classroom will develop empathy, and they'll develop more understanding about neurodiversity. So all of that, you know, sense of community and sense of belonging, that there are other people like me. And that is hard for a parent or, you know, a tutor to accomplish. I think another child can do that more easily. So we got a lot of feedback from those using what we have so far is more for sort of 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. It's elementary school. Some people show it to younger, that middle schoolers, they need, you know, do you have anything for middle school? So we are now casting again with some older kids, and we will be working on that this year to launch for next fall. And I think why that's so important is middle school is such a hard time for all kids, right? I mean, I still am getting over middle school. I feel like, you know, so many things are going on, and I saw for my own children. And so, you know, we're still working with experts. I mean, people who've really studied this, and we'll bring our own experience, of course. But we're talking to, you know, the educators and the researchers who have looked at LD for kids in middle school, and, you know, where there's the overlap issues that have to do with, you know, pre-adolescence and self-esteem. And, you know, we'll be trying to get at that and do it in a similar way. You know, it might not be as funny. The earlier ones tend to use humor a lot. I think for middle schoolers, some authenticity about how hard things are will be actually more relevant I don't know if you agree with that, but my sense is that
Yes,
that's
I fully agree. I think humor is always good, even for middle schoolers. But yeah, no, I agree that the connections that I've seen when it comes to ReaDEFY is it's about like you said, community connection, but it's the real stuff where those are the moments where you get chills and you're like, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. What just happened right there when you see a child say something and the other children's heads are doing this, and there's a connection of boom, whoa, I'm not the only one.
Oh, it's so huge. And we found that this was really my daughter, who has actually worked with me from the beginning on this in different ways, and is now in medical school, her first year. So that's really incredible. And she recently said to me that she's at UCLA and they have a learning difference, department, whatever office, and that you can get some funding. And she wants to try to actually do something online for high schoolers who are thinking of doing pre-med who are dyslexic, and have other kids she's met at UCLA and do a kind of mentoring thing, which I think is really exciting because it's really the same concept. It's like, that is so powerful when it can be, just kids a little bit older, giving that sense of, hey, I'm not alone. And yes, you can do this. You might need to do books on tape, or you might need this, and you need to get over whatever gets in the way of you using those strategies. But it's amazing when it can be said to you by a peer, so yeah, I mean, I think that sorry, I think I went off on a tangent. So what is that? Okay. I mean, I basically, I think that sense of community is key. And I was going to just say that during COVID, my daughter was the one who noticed that so many parents on Facebook were saying, my child is so isolated, kids who were dyslexic, because they're not getting to do any of the things that make them feel good about themselves, that are the extracurriculars or the sports or the things. They just have to sit here doing this academic stuff all the time. And it's hard. There are some things on Zoom that kids liked who are LD and some things they didn't, right? So she started, as part of SuperDVille, this thing called SuperD Friends, and kids from all over the country joined these things. And we're getting on once a week in these small groups with a mentor who was from our cast or maybe a little older. And they would watch a video, one of ours, but then they would just talk and share. And sometimes it went to, bullying, and they were in the group, none of them knew each other. And they were from all over the country. So they were learning about all kinds of ways that they were similar and different, and it was very empowering. And it brought home how much community and that breaking down the barriers of isolation for children with LD is critical. So for anyone who's dealing with this, whether from the parent side or the tutoring side, I hope SuperDVille is valuable, because what we were trying to do is say, not everyone has the resources to always do, every ideal thing that would bring community, bring that sense. So here's a quick way to at least start the process, start the dialogue, show that you're not alone, and then build off of that. It's obviously only one piece, but I hope that it's going to be a piece that is particularly valuable for underserved communities and families and places where the schools really aren't giving there are schools where you're not allowed to use the word dyslexia, right?
There are states where you're not allowed to use the word dyslexia.
Yes. And interestingly enough, my brother, who's dyslexic and was a stand-up comedian, he was the one who said in the very beginning, I think this should be called Dyslexiaville. And the reason he thought of the Ville was it should be a community, a place you go, like a fun, but it's, Dyslexiaville. And we did call it that in the very beginning, until a little way in, some teachers from Massachusetts said to me, Peggy, if you call it Dyslexiaville, we won't be able to show it in our school, because we have a principal, and there are many of them who don't want the word brought up. So anyway, it was good that we changed it, because we didn't want to limit it to just dyslexia. There are obviously all kinds of learning differences. I think it's good for dyslexics or kids with ADHD to realize the commonalities, and support each other. So, Super D also became something fun for the kids to say because they feel like, yeah, I'm Super D. They're very into, one of the kids came up with, shame is lame, that all that kind of stuff. I mean, the kids know once they get a little taste of this, they're the crusaders. I think this next generation really has a chance to change and push the needle if they get this social emotional learning in combination with the kind of tutoring that you're doing,
I 100% agree. And I want, like, what you're saying is so truly empowering when we talk about the word empowerment. And I wonder, have you had any messaging that you have found to be particularly useful for parents to understand the value of the SEL piece? I think most parents will, they'll buy into the idea that my child needs a writing tutor. They'll buy into the idea that my child needs to learn how to read, or they're really struggling in math.
So you were asking me if there's any particular messaging that particularly could help a parent understand why social emotional learning is important. Yes. And here's an interesting example, I think. So my husband is not dyslexic. And in fact, was someone who did high school in 3 years and was a mathematician wizard and is an economist. Okay. So in many ways, it was eye-opening for him to get to know me, just because there were so many ways in which I had gaps. I could be very articulate, but there were certain things I didn't know, so he learned a lot meeting me as an adult. He didn't know about dyslexia. Then we had 2 kids. My son is not dyslexic, and the younger child, Emma, had LD. And so recently the 2 of us my husband and I were driving and talking, and he was saying how he felt he was really lucky he found something that he loved to do. And he started talking about that. And I was like, Alan, you realize that you've just described what SuperDVille is all about. And he laughed and he said, well, I have tried to understand what SuperDVille is all about, but I never thought about it that way. And I said, yes. I said, we are trying to help little kids who have a learning difference and their parents, and their parents identify early on a way to think about their strengths, not just the weakness. And the parents too, because it's scary to see that your child is struggling with something that everybody else seems to be learning, and that is a skill that is needed, to be able to succeed. So it's clear that if you read studies about, just so-called normal, like not people with sort of neurodiversity, but that people find satisfaction when they do find something that they love, when they're connected to what they're doing, where it's using strengths and it's not all a struggle. That's true of anybody. So imagine how true that is for a child who's struggling. So I think that's one of the key things to help a parent understand, because it's one of the things the parents are anxious about. I mean, we're all anxious about that when we see our child struggling. Are they going to find something that they don't struggle in, that they can then enjoy and be happier about, and come and say, hey, Mom, look what I did, or hey, Dad, sorry, I of course said, hey, Mom, because us moms end up often having, taking the lead on all this, but there are dads too. So I didn't mean to leave dads out. So I feel like that is a very accessible way to think about this. There's a whole lot of other issues, like learning how to understand literally sort of how your brain works and how you process things, so that when you need extra time, you don't see it as such a negative. You just see it as, so my brain has to kind of go and use the picture side, you understand the left, right brain. I mean, that's kind of cool if you actually become someone who's like a little scientist who understands that. But it's scary. I think parents sometimes don't even want to go there, because it's hard to realize that, no, that's empowering.
Right.
That's very empowering, but that's not necessarily the place to start. I think the place to start is with this idea of the strength-based, learning and helping your child identify their strengths. And that's a core element of social emotional learning, right?
Right.
And then you can build off that. So if a child is found, they have incredible attention for working on a drawing, and they'll go back to it, and they'll, if they don't like something, they'll turn it into something else, and they'll use all this creativity. So then you can refer to that when they're struggling with something else and say, think about what you do when you're drawing. Think of what you bring to that. So it just becomes a language which everyone can work off of. So I hope that in the kinds of activities that we have in SuperDVille, and we have a part about SEL where there's different psychologists explaining why it's important, coming from different sort of angles. And, we've tried to do what we can, but in the end, I think it's the kids themselves who have been our best advocates. So on Facebook, and anyone can go to SuperDVille on Facebook, we have all these tips from our cast, and they're called Super D tips. And they're the kids giving tips to kids. Some of them are tips of how they've handled situations, and some of them are for parents.
I love it.
And I think it's really powerful, to hear from children who have benefited from social emotional learning. They don't call it that, just from people understanding them and their feelings.
Right.
And they're expressing that to the adults. I think that's very powerful.
I love that so much. So, in addition to, joining you on Facebook, how else can we help support your mission? Because it's such an important one, and it really is.
I appreciate your, reaching out. And I would say that for, right now, what we really would love is just people to spread the word, to go to superdville.com. It basically is really easy to subscribe. You can watch the trailer again or read about what we do, but then the best thing is just to go look at it and then let anyone who has a child, who's a tutor, who, that they can use this. Because really we're trying to we have, I think, almost 4,000 subscribers, and we've had no marketing budget. This has all been word of mouth, and I'm really, really proud of the community for that, But also it's really exciting. We have someone, at least one family or person or tutor in every state.
Wow.
Some states have many more, but in every state.
Amazing.
Well, of course, right? Because we know it's 1 in 5, and we know it's in every state. But really, it is word of mouth. So the more people can share on Facebook, can go to our Facebook page and follow us, and then and just if you have watched this podcast, then just let people know. And that is what we really need right now. Is we really need to just keep getting the word out and getting people using this. And the episodes that are available are particularly great for 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. And why that's, I think, helpful is that's sort of the age where kids, who've been struggling start having to take, the test in 3rd grade. all stuff starts getting harder.
Yeah.
Now it can be shown to younger kids, and I know people who use it with 2nd graders. And so, and older kids too. It depends who the kids are. But so just spread the word. That would really, really help us this year.
Absolutely. And I have sensed that, COVID catapulted us into this online world, right? But I think what's one of the great things that has come out of it is that there really is a community of people just trying to spread the word and trying to inform that we are talking about 20% of our population, and the banding together of what has happened with professionals and in speaking to this population and really getting kids what they need has been really exciting.
Definitely. And you made me think of something else we need when you spoke about that, which is that anyone who is a parent or a professional who looks at SuperDVille, who has ideas of ways we could improve it or themes or stories of things that they've seen with the kids they work with, please contact us. Contact me. The contact information is everywhere, but you can go to questions@superdville.com. That's one way to email, or Peggy@superdville.com, and I will get it and I will respond. I mean, we really want to hear from people. This has been made by people who've lived it. You know, whether you're dyslexic or you're someone who's working with a dyslexic or you're a parent of a dyslexic. So the more people communicate with us from the community, the stronger this project will be, you know, the stronger this curriculum will be.
Absolutely. And the last question that I always like to end with is, what do you think that we need to do in order for our community with dyslexia to thrive as opposed to just survive?
Well, I always like to say that I hope that all the projects like what I'm doing and, you know, there's a wonderful project called Eye to Eye that's in many schools, and, you know, that we all become obsolete at a certain point. Like we won't be needed because it'll all be integrated into a child's day, you know, into the schools, but until that happens, I think that we have to be open and vocal, reach out, and really understand that building this community and being open and not hiding anything about your child's LD or your own LD, if you're a child listening to this, will help us thrive. Because it's the shame and the hiding that slows us down. You know, that's been true with every kind of community, right? And people are always saying, why is the autism community kind of ahead of the LD community? I mean, that's a question that people ask who work in the field. I don't think the average person asks that question, but people ask that, you know, because the autism issue sort of took off at a certain point, and all of a sudden people were really learning and hearing about it. Well, one thing is that it's more apparent, right? If a child has autism. And so then that brings up the discussion. You can't hide it, right? But, you know, LD, you can hide. Right. And parents can hide from people, you know, or be in denial about it. Yeah. And kids can hide it. And that has slowed us down, I think. Yeah. I agree. I think that we will thrive the minute we treat it as truly, you know, we are proud. We are happy to be talking about this. We want to educate. We are not ashamed. Yeah. It will change the dynamic. It'll change the paradigm and the discussion. So that's why I see the kids in our cast and the new kids I'm about to cast as real crusaders, you know, that I am determined that this young generation will be the essence of that. They wouldn't even think to hide it. You know, they wouldn't even, one of the kids in the cast, said this incredible thing. She didn't find out that she had dyslexia until she was 13, and she didn't know how to read. And she had loving parents and a supportive religious community, and was very involved in her church. And so she had a great self-esteem, actually. Like, you know, everyone supported her, but she could not read a menu, you know, on a food truck. Right. And once she became part of the cast and the community of kids that she saw every week in rehearsals, and she was at an LD school for the first time, which is how I found out about her. It's Charlie, and she's a tall African-American beauty in the cast. So I just point her out for those who watch the episodes. I was interviewing her because I did periodically with the cast. And she said, you know, I used to not want to tell anyone. I was so ashamed. And now that I've been part of SuperDVille, I want to go on the rooftop and yell to everybody, I'm dyslexic. And I'm proud of it. And I mean, literally, I, you know, almost burst into tears because it was so incredible to see how far she'd come, and that's the essence of some of this social emotional learning. Because then that means, think of all the things she can do now, right? You know, and that she's not wasting energy being ashamed and hiding. Right. So.
Oh, that's amazing. What a fantastic story. And I'm so grateful to you for your work and for spending this time with me. And I'm feeling really empowered myself and energized. And so I wanted to say thank you.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and sorry for the technical challenges, but we did survive them. And
No worries.
and I think all of you who devote yourself to this work, I know what it meant in my life. And I just know how many children are benefiting from it. And so I have to thank you for, choosing to do what you do.
Thank you, Peggy.